I think native fashion is more storytelling. It's not something we just wear. Clothes is just something we put on and then take off. To us, there's a story behind it. There was a story in how it was created. There are traditional knowledge embedded into how something was either stitched or woven. You're telling a story in the design that is pulled from creation stories. And so when indigenous people wear their fashion, if you look at it, you can see the stories, you can see the symbolisms, you can see the language. And I think that's what's different with native fashion is that it's more than just putting on a garment. It's an act of resistance.
Have you ever imagined fashion being as diverse as human culture? Have you ever dreamed of a respectful, ethical, and socially just fashion industry? Have you ever envisioned sustainability being at the core of the entire fashion system? This is your host, Laura Beltrán-Rubio. I'm a fashion curator, researcher, and educator. My mission is to translate scholarly insights into actionable strategies that we can all take to reshape how we create, wear, and think about fashion. So find a comfortable seat, brew some tea, and open your notebook as you join me in the quest for redressing fashion. Hello, Niya. I'm very excited to have you here. Thank you. Thank you for accepting the invitation. It is an honor for me to have you in this podcast as only the second guest speaker or interviewee here. I have been following your work for quite a long time, I think, since you were working maybe for Phoenix Fashion Week. And I have followed you into your new project, which I hope we can talk more about later. But before delving into the conversation, I would like you to please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your journey in fashion and how you got to where you are today.
Hi everyone, my name is Niya DeGroat. I am a Dene person from Arizona here in the United States. I am a fashion writer and a multi-hyphenate creative. I've been working in the fashion industry for 13 years now. I started as an intern for Phoenix Fashion Week in 2012. There was a local designer here in Flagstaff. She was doing modest wear for Mormon women and she needed a intern. It's funny because I answered her ad through Craigslist, which isn't the usual spot to find a fashion job per se. Because Craigslist back then, well, it still is a little sketchy. But she brought me on. Other than having a love for fashion, I had no experience in fashion. She wanted help with graphic design, photography, and just being her assistant. And she was selected by Phoenix Fashion Week to be a part of their boot camp and their designer competition. And so she asked me, and she said because of the way I came to the interview, she said she thought I was fashionable, which I thought was funny because I
Lovely.
feel like I'm the least fashionable person. But anyway, in that role, I self-taught myself. At that point, I didn't have, I had a phone, but I didn't have social media. I had the apps, but I wasn't really engaged in it. So I had to sort of train myself how to do these things. Yeah, so I just hit the ground running. I taught myself how to do graphic design, marketing, social media, and before that, I had a degree in photography. So that was easy to do. It was just implementing all these new avenues. Yeah, so from that point, that's how I got a chance to experience Phoenix Fashion Week. And after the internship, I went back to Phoenix Fashion Week just as a spectator in 2013, 2014. And then I came across an ad and they were looking for ambassadors. They're called ambassadors, but it's volunteers and interns. And so I applied, I got in, and same thing, because of all my skills, they didn't know where to put me. And then eventually each department fought over me just because of how useful I was. And so I started in styling. Never got to do styling because I was like a pinball. I was going to every department. So I moved from styling to business operations and then social media and then media. And then Brian wanted me to be his assistant. So eventually I landed on social media and branding. And then from there, within a year, I was promoted to social media and branding leader. And then for 5 years, I held that role. And then eventually became director of media and branding. So my job was just to set the creative and marketing strategy for the brand identity companies, so visual and writing. So yeah, for the last 7 years, I was really pivotal in making sure that Phoenix Fashion Week looked and sounded pretty. So I became the person who made things look pretty in that aspect. And so within that, and I've written about this before. The first time I was in Phoenix Fashion Week, after the first day, I believe, I was soaking in all the excitement, the hard work, and then I looked around and it was just me. I was the only Native person on staff in the event, even though the event took place on a tribal casino on tribal land, but it's a casino that caters to the Phoenix non-native clientele. So it's very rich, very luxe. And so I went around the hotel and the casino looking for native people who looked like me. And of course, they were in the background. They were the hired help. They were in the back. And then I was going back to my hotel room and I was still trying to look for anything that indicated that this was a native establishment. And then in on my way to the hotel room, I saw this little room, and then it said cultural display, and I said, "Oh, that's where we are. We're shoved in the corner. We're shoved in the corner just to be a remnant of the past, the spectacle." And then I thought to myself, we're still in display cases. We're still mounted on the wall like taxidermies of the past. And I was like, wow. So that was the moment in my career that I thought, well, I need to change that. And so the next year I asked Brian, I started looking for native designers, and luckily I found two. And one was Navajo and one was Acoma Pueblo. And we recruited them and I helped them, mentored them, and showed them ropes and sort of give them tips on how to succeed. And that first try, Lauren Aragon, who's the Acoma designer, almost won. He was runner up, and then he came out the following year, and then he won. So he became
Amazing.
the first Native American designer in that program's history. Yeah. And then just from that moment, it just blossomed. Some more designers, more indigenous representation as far as entertainment, staff, well, not models yet, but that came later. So yeah,
Mhm.
in last year, yeah, 2024, wanted to start a new chapter, so I left Phoenix Fashion Week, and I started working for another Native magazine called Native Max Magazine. I was their social media manager for 2 years, but with this current climate, funding went away, and so she had to let go of her staff. And so I pivot with my master's thesis was we had to make our own magazine, and that was in 2019. And so I created this magazine called Indigène, and it's French for Indigenous. And I wanted to pay homage to Paris just because it was the birthplace of like the fashion system as we know it, but still keep it native. So I blended the two. And I took 6 years of French, but don't ask me to speak French because it all went away. I never got to go to Paris to use it.
We
So
need
that's
to bring you over to
the
Paris so you can
I
bring it
know.
back.
And so that was the inspiration behind the name. And so I created the magazine, I created the thesis, and then COVID happened the last semester of my school. So everything, the
Mhm.
motivation, the depression, the uncertainty kicked in. And so I was like, just like sad like everyone else. So I graduated and then I just continued with my Phoenix fashion work because we went virtual. So that took a lot of work. And then this year in May, I decided maybe it's time for me to bring that platform back and do my own thing because up to this point I've been making other brand
Mhm.
successful and using my talents. And I'm great for it because he gave me the opportunity to do so. But I wanted to do something for myself for once. And so I attended the Native Fashion Week in Santa Fe in May. There was two happening. I didn't know there was two. I guess one had branched out. There's a long story behind that. But
Long
there was
story.
two. There's the established SWAIA, the Southwest Association for American Indian Arts, which hosts the famous Indian market in Santa Fe. And then there was the director who left that organization and started her own. So I attended the new independent one, not knowing what I'm signing up for. And then I attended and I was blown away. I was like, here I was here in Phoenix thinking I was doing important work, like I was the only one. And then I attended this show. I mean, I would see it in on social media all these years. And then I attended this event and I was like, wow, there's all these creatives. I've met new designers, I met new people, and they're all while I was doing my thing, they were doing their thing. So it was such a it was inspiring moment to be amongst indigenous people all the way around, do things that I love to do. So yeah, and so I did a soft launch of Indigène just through social media, and then I created a website for articles, and yeah, and it's been successful. It's continuing to grow. It's slow, but all things take time. And I've sort of adopted that slow fashion that Indigenous people are
Mm,
known for. So
yeah.
I've sort of adopted that mentality that I don't always have to post. I don't have to keep up with the times. I don't have to daily. Like it's always that frenzy that I've gotten used to. And so it's like, whoa, it's okay to not post every day, every minute. Maybe I can post next week. There's a lot of value in just slowing things down. So that's how I've incorporated the indigenous practice of slow fashion. So to make it meaningful, to make it worthwhile, and not just so trendy and frenzy and hectic and saturated. Yeah,
Yeah. And just produce content just for the sake of producing content, but, sit with it, think about it, and then
right.
create the content that you want to create, right? Which ends up being much more mindful and I would say enriching than just pushing things out, rushing to push everything out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I do love that magazine. I remember I was very excited when I saw you probably soft launch it on social media. I'm not really sure when exactly I realized, but I do follow you on Instagram, so I saw something about it maybe on your stories or something and I immediately went and followed and I've been enjoying the content about that Santa Fe Fashion Week that you went to more recently. I think you mentioned you had gone to Indigenous New York Fashion Week. I'm not really
Yes.
sure how much you've shared. I think I saw some videos. I haven't really gone to the website, but it's
Yeah.
very exciting to have more and more platforms to do this. And actually, one thing that you just made me think is that yes, there are a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And actually, I do admire a lot your work in Phoenix. And I think Phoenix, for me at least, it's an interesting city. I have family who moved to Phoenix relatively recently. And so I really have only been to Phoenix a few times over the past maybe like 5-ish years. But every time I go, I am amazed and I am inspired by the Indigenous presence there, just in general. And even I was there in March and I didn't know, but Scottsdale Art Week was happening. And so I ended up going there, and there was this small Indigenous fashion show in the middle of the art fair, and that's something that I wish could happen more in other places. So, yes, Santa Fe is this big center for Indigenous fashion, but I personally would consider Phoenix to be another very big center and very impressive center for, Indigenous fashion and Indigenous arts, I would say.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. Especially like local native organizations, nonprofit organizations in Phoenix have created their own fashion shows. So it's nice to see. I think they've, in a sense, gotten tired of wanting to include it. So I think at this point, they're like, just like Indigenous New York Fashion Week. What are we waiting for? Let's just do our own. And I think that it's long overdue, but it's exciting to see how indigenous communities are taking control of their own narrative and finding
Yeah.
ways to share their story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the other thing that I wanted to ask you, and this has to do with your journey and who you are, and you even said it a few minutes ago, you describe yourself as a multi hyphenate creative in fashion, and you have lots of experience as a journalist, as a photographer, producer, a stylist, creative director, just a lot of things. And It's interesting that when you were sharing your story, you said something about they didn't know where to put me, so they ended up kind of like moving me everywhere. And that ended up, I think, working to your benefit because it's admirable how versatile you are. It's also in great part because of your experience, right? But I also
Right.
sometimes see these different types of work that you can do as a sort of revolution as well in what working in fashion can be and probably work in general, because I do think that the way maybe that especially the Western canon has made us think is that we all belong to one single category, and that's kind of it. And then you can't really do anything else. Like, you have to be an expert in your field, and that's basically it. And then here you are showing us that you can do a lot of different things. And I personally see it, and I try to do that myself, not as an Indigenous woman, but as a Latina, to kind of resist against all of these impositions from the Western colonial world that we live in. But I wanted to ask you, what is your take on this? Would you agree with that? Is it something that you purposefully embody? Is it not? How do you navigate all of this?
Yeah. I think it started in seventh grade. I had just moved from the Navajo homelands where I was surrounded by nothing but Diné people. And my mom uprooted us to Albuquerque, New Mexico, because she was going back for her doctoral program. And so I went from this environment where everyone looked like me, sounded like me, and I was immediately placed into a school where everyone didn't look like me. There was diversity, there was more non-natives. I became the only native from that moment on. And I remember I had this science teacher. She was non-native, she was white. And the first day she came up to me, she said, I know you're native. And she gave me that whole spiel. My grandma's a Cherokee princess. And I was like, oh, here we go. And then she said, I know as we as indigenous people, we don't like to engage. So I don't care if you just sit in the back. I can't remember the exact phrasing, but she basically said, I know you won't try, so I won't force you to try. And so I took that as a challenge. I said, okay, I'll show you. And so the next day I sat in the
I love
front. I
that.
was asking all the questions. I was being the annoying student who always has a question or who always knows the answer. And so I made that my personality, not just for her class, but for every class, because they all had that same mentality. Oh, the natives have arrived, so we have to not cater them. We, we don't have to encourage them because to them they thought we were just hopeless. So why even bother? And so I took that as a challenge. Like, okay, I'll show you. Because I've always been intuitive. I've always been intelligent. Even though I'm shy, I can flip a switch. And I guess they call it an ambivert.
Mm.
And so I've I've taken on that role of being a code switcher because I've been a code switcher my whole life, navigating between being too indigenous, being too American, being too masculine, being too feminine. So I think that relates to the Navajo word for two spirit, which is naglehe, and it means one who changes or one who transforms or one who is always in a state of flux. So they're like, I just envision like the spirit aura where there's just nothing but spirits like bouncing back and forth. So I internally, that's how I view my binary, I guess. So to me, neither gender is satisfied or they're always trying to take center stage. To me, that is how I see it. And so unfortunately that wasn't always the case because I did grow up in the closet.
Mm.
And I had a traumatizing event with my late father. Unbeknownst to him, he didn't know better, but he was raised in a time of Indian boarding school. So he had that trauma put on him. And so it sort of translated into me when I was wearing nail polish one day and I was trying to hide it. And he very aggressively forced me to the restroom to wash it off. And from just that experience, that shock, that anger, that disappointment in him scared me. And I was like, oh, so this is where I have to shut off that femininity. And so I did. Because before, up to that point, I was very feminine. I was very happy kid. And then, but from that day on, I started to shut down. Even though my parents are very liberal, they're very traditional. I guess the weight of Western society is just so heavy for Indigenous people that we're always trying to adapt, adjust. Like I said, both my parents are products of boarding school, so they have that traumatic history they've had to deal with, and they've inadvertently passed on those same traits. But my mother has always been accepting. She's the one that taught me about Two Spirit. She's traditional Navajo woman, but still because I was her sort of golden child. Not to disparage my brothers, my siblings, but I thought if I told her who I was, then it would be a burden on her. So I didn't want to be. It would ruin her image of me of being this perfect goody two shoes kid. And so I hid myself to the age of 23, and then
Oh,
I came
wow.
out. I came out as a gay man at that point. Even just exploring my identity, it's been a roller coaster. So at that point, I just identified, oh, I'm a gay man. Duh. But then when COVID happened and we were like trapped with our thoughts, and I joined this app, Clubhouse, which is a voice only
Oh,
social
yeah, I
media
think I
app. And
remember
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I started communicating with other 2S LGBTQ communities and joining these topics, and that experience sort of expanded what I already knew of gendered and sexual diverse people. And then I was like, oh, that's me. That's what a two spirit is. I'm not just a masculine gay man. And so I sort of accepted my two-spirited identity to the point that it's evolving. So right now I'm more of in the non-binary space, the third gender
Mm,
space. And so I think had I not had that traumatic experience as a kid, I think I would be transgender. So but that's just it's hard to put a label on two-spiritedness because in Western society, like you said, you're one thing, so you have to stay in
yeah.
that letter. Whereas Indigenous people, the concept of Two Spirit is a full spectrum, and you can be any and all of those identities. So when I tell people I'm Two Spirit, they're like, okay, what is that? They either say, what is that, or what kind? And I'm like, and so
Oh,
I, I had to say I'm a non-binary. And they're like, oh, okay. And then they see another Two Spirit, they meet another Two Spirit, and then they're transgender two spirit, and so they get confused like I thought.
right,
So
right.
they want just one category, one letter for you to be, and so it becomes exhausting. And then you have to be an educator for everyone you meet. You have to come out
Oh,
to
yeah.
everyone you meet. So so which
Yeah.
is fine, I'll do it, I'm happy to do it, but imagine the emotional work and that it
Yeah.
takes just to introduce yourself, not only as just a queer person but as an indigenous person. So
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
then going back to your question, so I think that constant like fluidity in my not only my identity but in my talents sort of forced me to join everything. So I was in band, I was in theater, I was in National Honor Society, I was in French club, I was in French Honor
I love
Society.
this.
So so throughout all my life, I've always been a chameleon. So like just going here, and just because I have many interests, and rather than not do something, I take it as a challenge. And then as an act of protest, because in all these spaces, Native people aren't seen. And so I took it upon myself to be, oh, I'll be the first Native in this, I'll be the first Native in that, and I'll be the first Native in that. So I think as Indigenous people, we've come to accept the fact that we always have to be either the only native in the room or the first person in the room. Yeah. So I think that's how I've navigated my life, just being a code switcher. Am I masculine? Am I feminine? Am I indigenous? Am I American? And I'm also a Gemini. So there's that
I love
aspect
that.
of it.
Yeah, you have it everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's because it's interesting, right? Because as you were explaining your two-spiritedness, and even from the very beginning when you shared translation from the Navajo word, I was thinking that there is also, I think, a problem in translation, right? Because
Right,
being two
exactly.
spirited is more than the two spirit word that we know for it in English. It's a lot about fluidity and code switching. And in a way, this part of your identity is also translated to your professional endeavors beautifully, which I think, and I mean, I say this just having heard your way of translating the word, but I wonder if it's all encompassed in one way or another in the language, in the Navajo language, in your own kind of
Right.
cultural conceptions of the word. And you are just living this identity in many ways, personally, of course, and through your what we would call gender expression in English, but then also through your professional endeavors and through your creativity and in the way you share basically your gifts with the world.
Right. Yeah, no, you're
I
right. Every time you translate something to English, it loses its value or it sounds funny. There's a whole deeper meaning behind the word two spirit in our language, and I've just hit the surface. So, yeah.
Mm, yeah. Well, I would actually like to ask you a little bit more about it, about being a two-spirited person. And I think more, well, more than the history or what it means, because I think you already gave us an overview of what that is. I'd like to ask you about its relationship with your own journey in fashion. How has it shaped your engagement with fashion? I think personally through your style, through how you present yourself, but maybe also with how you work in fashion and how you relate with other fashion professionals or how you create fashion in the different ways that you create it in.
I think, especially in more recent years, I've embraced the two spirit aspect. So, whether it's writing a story more about that's two spirit centered or featuring a model that's two spirited, because before I joined fashion, I was very into Western fashion, Western beauty standards. I could name a Oscar de la Renta dress just by looking at it, and people would be like, wow. So I was very Western fashion, duh, in. It wasn't until I joined Phoenix Fashion Week that I started working with emerging designers, people just starting out. And I think Phoenix Fashion Week gave me that platform to explore emerging fashion designers. And slowly I've shed that Western, like the established designers, the fashion houses, the luxury, the drama. And so now I look forward to immersion designers. I think my focus has shifted, especially with native fashions. We're all emerging designers, but I find myself those Western ideals creeping back in when I'm dealing with native fashion because it's been so ingrained in me that I forget, oh, this is native fashion. It's time to think indigenous.
Mm,
Because Phoenix Fashion Week, as diverse and inclusive as it's been, they still adhere to, in terms of models, the skinny, the tall, the blonde. No shade to them because it's just a thing that's been around so long that it's hard for us to change. I mean, we have diversity in skin tone and cultural background, but again, the standard of beauty is the same, like from the 90s, where it's very skinny, tall, thin. So I've noticed in indigenous fashion, all shapes and sizes walk the runways, and it's such a beautiful sight because you have plus size models, you have short models, you have models with disabilities, and you have two spirit models. And so it's such a refreshing to see,
mm,
especially the two spirit identities, because traditionally in most indigenous communities, not all indigenous communities, two spirits are revered. They're supposed to be welcome, they're supposed to be embraced. And so, but because of colonialization, that traditional acceptance has been lost or been erased. Because when the explorers and the colonists arrived on these shores, they saw men wearing skirts, women being in charge, and then you can read it in these diaries. And I think that gave them the access. Oh, this is how we can change them if we get rid of the women and get rid of the queer people, because at that point, women and queer people were in charge and they lived freely, they had all the liberty. And I think, especially in today's world, people who don't understand queer people get jealous of queer people because their range of expression is so vast that it's too much that I think cisgender people can't handle it. And so their only mode of reaction is to be hateful or to erase it. And I just don't understand why, how someone chooses to live and love who they want or how they want affects them so much, and it's just so exhausting just to turn on the news and the social media. It's like every day there's something against queer and trans people, and it's just like, so yeah. So I think in response to that, I've tried to implement my queerness more, whether it be through writing, coverage, spotlight, and I do want to do more. But like I said, every day I'm exploring what to feature, who to feature. Yeah, so I'm very excited just to see how I can incorporate two-spirit people more. Even with my personal fashion, I've always avoided being overtly feminine. And so lately I've incorporated pieces that are feminine and I'm more comfortable now. Whereas before I always had to be masculine, I had to look butch, I had to um other than my hair, which I like short and faded, I want to explore everything else a little more feminine. So I think it's been a slow process, but I've starting to wear makeup more. So yeah, it's just like an evolution, like the root of
Yeah.
the indigenous, the net word for two spirit, one who's constantly changing, and I think that applies to every aspect of my life so far.
Yes, and how you are constantly changing. Also, I think it's beautiful that you're also expressing it in your style and kind of tuning back into that feminine side that you even shut down at some
Mhm.
point when you realized that it was, well, yeah, that it wasn't necessarily accepted around you, and so now you're kind of tuning back into it. I love that. I love seeing that flourishing. And I love how you're talking about also finding ways to kind of keep that presence, especially at a time when it's receiving a lot of pushback and the queer people of all sorts are being increasingly rejected and discriminated against and even marginalized because the discourses in our society are changing. And I think there's the pushback against a lot of the diversity that we had finally seen flourish recently, not because we weren't here before, but because we are claiming more space, right? And so I really like how you're bringing your identity together with your work to try to keep that presence. And actually, it's making me think of a quote that I loved. I wrote it. I have a board on here on my left side, so I'm looking at it. I wrote it after the launch of Anthony Delaney's book called Queer Georgians or Queer Enlightenments in the United States. He's an Irish author, and the book is basically about some histories of queer people in the 18th century. And at the book launch, he said that one thing that he has learned from studying queer people and from being queer himself is that all it takes to make history is to keep going and to keep showing up and to keep repeating the things that you know are true, and eventually someone will recognize them, and like people around you will, society will, but then history will too, and like humanity will too. And I thought that was beautiful, and it was, I think, an encouragement to a lot of us to keep doing what we know to do, and maybe keep insisting in what we know and keep sharing our stories, keep showing up in a way, and to maintain our presence basically.
It's funny that you say that. You said presence more than once. I forgot to mention that my name in Dene means to be present. Depending on context, the root word means to be present. And so I think I've embodied my name in my career because I've always made sure that my presence was known. I've always taken up space. And so my name is also a motivator in how I live my life because
Mm.
I guess my mother had the foresight of I was always going to take up space. Yeah.
She knew it.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of presence and taking space, you shared a little bit earlier of your experience in Phoenix Fashion Week, and then also, especially, how you kind of insisted to make sure that there was a greater Native presence, especially on the side of designers and I think some of the staff as well in Phoenix Fashion Week. But I would like to ask you a little bit more, not necessarily about your experience there, but your contributions to what I think is indigenizing fashion. And I think you have written about it. You did mention earlier that you wrote something about your work in Finnish Fashion Week and like these realization that there wasn't enough of an indigenous presence. There is one article written by you. I don't know if it's the same one that you were referring to on cultural survival that I really like, and I actually assign it to my students. And it's
Oh, nice.
translated to Spanish, so when I taught in Colombia for a little bit, I even use the translated version for my Spanish speaking students. So I love that article. And you talk a little bit about what it means to indigenize fashion. So I would like us to stop for a minute and think about that. So for context, for listeners of the show, for people who follow me on social media, they might know that I do complain a lot about fashion being a little too centered on the white Euro North American people and culture. And by contrast, Indigenous people, Latin American people, African, Asian, and Black and Brown people from all over are basically erased in probably the worst case. In the best case, they are misrepresented in a lot of the storytelling, the images that we see about fashion. There's also a lot of inspiration that's misused, and it turns to be appropriation of many of these cultures. And so there is a need to kind of reinsert these people into the fashion narratives and to create other forms of representation that are accurate, but that are also, in a way, kind of authentic. And that might not be the best word, but that are rooted in our practices, our beliefs, our ideas about fashion. And so I would say that indigenizing fashion is part of this kind of movement to, again, be present, create resistance, find new ways of sharing our stories. So I would like to ask you how you think of indigenizing fashion. What does it mean to you? How have you done it? But then also, how can other people from other cultural backgrounds participate in this process of indigenizing fashion and like reclaiming space for indigenous people?
I think both designers and consumers can indigenize fashion just by, for designers, implementing, like I said earlier, a slow process of return to slow fashion. Because right now we're bombarded with new collections, new trends, new, and it's like there's so much newness that there's a lot of waste with that. And I think if designers would be more mindful of where their fabrics come from, how they make their fabrics, just returning back to implementing sustainable practices that indigenous people have been doing since time memorial. And then as a consumer, shop less or make your own clothes. I know that's hard, easier said than done because not everyone can make their own clothes, but thrift more, I guess. Upcycle, recycle. Don't wear an outfit just once and then hang it back up. But with that, I think telling people how to be sustainable comes with privilege. Although something's made sustainably, cost goes up. Um, and for indigenous people, especially those who live on the homelands, back on the reservation, they don't have access to sustainable stores. Most of the times, I know from where I'm from, the rural community, when we go shopping, it takes us an hour, 2 hours to go to the border town city. And we get there, we have a budget. And so we're used to the fast stuff. So fast food, fast fashion, Walmart. So a lot of these malls that cater to fast fashion. And then they shop there only because it's accessible and they don't have the knowledge to say, oh, I shouldn't shop this because it was made in a sweatshop and the person who made it only made cent pennies out of this. So not everyone is trained to think when they see a garment where the development, and so I think It's when Indigenous people get mad at our own people for shopping at these stores without remembering the lack of access they have economically, just in general, like there's no access. So, of course, with their wallet, they're going to choose the fast fashion stuff. And it's not something they can control. It's just how that's what they have access to. And so I think it's one thing to say we should return, everyone should shop sustainably, but at the same time, that comes with privilege. And I think if we educate people more instead of wagging our finger at people, I think we can build a better fashion community and return to, like I said, a slower way of making fashion so that it not only sustains us, protects Mother Earth, which I think everyone has forgotten. And I think in the net way, if you mistreat Mother Earth, she will react negatively in
Mm.
her way. And it's not a negative way, it's just her way that she's doing it. And we're seeing it with all these hurricanes, all these climate change, and even with transgender people. In the net philosophy, if you mistreat queer and trans people, because in our society, our main deity is changing woman, and queer people share her name. So changing woman in the society is a stun ugly. So there's that word again, knuckly. And queer people and Two Spirit are called knuckly. And when she bore children, she had twins, and then her third child, she couldn't decide what she wanted, so she made them both. And so our even in our creation story, Turquoise Child was the first Two Spirit, holy sacred deity, and they have their own story of saving the world.
Mm.
So I think in a roundabout way, like all this trans hate in the world, I think Mother Earth will, in a way, do something to counter that, if not human. I think she will. Hopefully. My mother sees it. She's the one that tells me. She reminds me, that's why don't all this hate towards queer, all this hate in general is going to have a negative reaction because the whole part of the net society is to live in balance. We acknowledge that there is evil and good, and there's supposed to be a balance, not one. Yeah, so one shouldn't be more than the other. And when that happens, chaos happens. So I think we're in that time where, even in our creation stories, every time there was chaos, something happened for us to go into the next world. So I wonder if in all these years and every transition that's happened, I wonder if this is what it felt like.
Yeah.
Um,
I wondered too. Sorry to interject, but I was thinking also even of Andean worldviews that see this moment, the Pachacuti, the moment of the world needs to be completely upside down and it's kind of shaken for a new cycle to begin and before a kind of a peaceful, orderly world to emerge from that. But it does require a big shakeup. It does need the world to be completely turned upside down first, and then it kind of calms down. So yeah, I do wonder that too. I think about this Pachacuti and I'm like, man, is this what it feels like? Because I kind of do feel like it's all upside down.
right.
And then the other thing that I was thinking is that as you were speaking, especially about sustainability and this very close relationship with Mother Earth, one of the things that I have read about native fashion and native fashion perspectives is how it's rooted on the land. And some theorists have called it land based fashion or like a land based fashion system. And I do think that we see it in a lot of the practices that you've mentioned. So, yes, it's something that we could call sustainability, but it also has to do with like extending the life cycle of things, maximizing the use of materials, which of course include clothes. So, not just using clothes once or twice and that's it, but like using them as much as you can, repurposing them when needed, mending them when needed. So it's definitely a much slower approach to fashion that becomes or can become, I think, in a way seasonal, but seasonal in a way that makes sense with the seasons of Mother Earth, and not seasonal in the fast-paced way that the fashion system has imposed, where we need to change clothes pretty much every week because they want to sell more and more and more, right?
Right. Exactly. It's funny you said seasons changing. In my culture, our new year is next month. So October
Mm-hmm.
is our new year. And a lot of our months are named after actual practices like when the leaves changes, when the leaves are bigger,
Mm,
when it's time to harvest, when the baby eagles start crying is February. And
that's so
so
beautiful.
it's very descriptive. I noticed the Ned language is very descriptive. When I ask my mother how you say this, and then I said, "What does that mean?" And she explains it, and I'm like, "That sounds so much better in Navajo than it does in English." And so, um, I think that's
Yes,
what
problems of
how that
translation again.
that's how native fashion is. I think I think native fashion is more storytelling. It's not something we just wear. Clothes is just something we put on and then take off. To us, there's a story behind it. There was a story in how it was created. There are traditional knowledge embedded into how something was either stitched or woven. I know when we make, as traditional Navajo people, when we make our rug dress with the loom and the yarn and the sheep wool, even though it takes forever, there's a reason why it takes forever is because each strand, each woven has a purpose. There's a feminine side and a masculine side that you have to adhere to and include. So maybe this strand is a feminine strand and then the next one is a masculine pattern. So there's all these creations. You're telling a story in the design that is pulled from creation stories. And so when indigenous people wear their fashion, if you look at it, you can see the stories, you can see the symbolisms, you can see the language. And I think that's what's different with native fashion is that it's more than just putting on a garment. It's an act of resistance, as we've been talking about. It's an act of
Yeah.
especially with our history in this country in the US, we were forbidden to wear our clothes. We were forbidden to practice our ceremonies. I mean, residential schools erased all that. They cut our hair. They put us in dresses and suits, and they took all that away from us. And so now that we have the wherewithal to do it ourselves, to wear our clothes. It's exciting because we for so long we've been forbidden to do that. And as far as appropriation, the reason why we get mad is when we see a non-native person either steal or appropriate our designs. It's like it takes us back to that time where that was forbidden. And it's like, how come you guys can do it, but we can't? So there's that long hurtness that's out there. And then why, if you're going to be inspired by us, why not just collaborate with us? And I
Yeah.
think that's and I think that's what we're so frustrated as Indigenous people is that there's never a discussion, there's never a permission, there's never a collaboration. It's always, oh, that looks pretty. I'm just going to do it my way. And then when they do it, the meaning, the symbolism, the storytelling is lost because it looks cheap and it looks messy. I'm reminded of, I think it was Valentino. They did a handbag and it had the floral motifs of First Nations Native people. And then the designer who made a similar handbag, she put compare and contrast, and you could see the native version was beautiful, intricate, symmetrical, and then Valentino, but I believe someone dubbed it Valentimu, like Timu, and it was messy, it was ugly, and it looked just like why couldn't they just collaborate with the indigenous person and incorporate their fabric, their stitching, their pattern, and it would have been more meaningful. And so yeah, I think like I said, and it goes back to that code switching. I think this happens with Native American or even indigenous designers in general. We're always tiptoeing on, is it too indigenous or is it not indigenous enough? Is it too American? So we're always on this tightrope, and we're never going to satisfy everyone because, like I said, when we make when native, I say we, as if I design, as native designers create a contemporary look, people in the peanut gallery on the indigenous side are like, that's not indigenous. So either way, we're going to disappoint a certain audience. It's like, it's too American, it's too Western looking, it's too contemporary. And then when you go over here into the Western side, they're like, it's too arts and craft, it's too costumey, it's too indigenous. So it's like there's never a win-win. But I think native fashion has been around long enough that at this point we don't care. We're taking control of our narrative and we're just gonna do what we do. And I saw this in Indigenous New York Fashion Week. Everyone kept asking, this is so long overdue, this is exciting, what took so long? And the organizers were like, yeah, well, that's what we were asking. Why, what were we waiting for? Why were we waiting for permission? Why were we waiting for the CFDA to include us? Let's just do it ourselves. And it was a very
Yeah,
collaborative, community-driven, grassroots event. It was very intimate, very small, but just because it was very intimate, very small, doesn't mean a lot of work went into it because just watching and observing. I was trying not to get in my event producer mode because I had notes for them, but I kept it to myself. But I had to remember, even with my magazine, it's very small, it's very fluid, so I shouldn't be so harsh in my criticism. But I have to remember everything has to start somewhere, and it'll only grow and get bigger every year. So I'm excited to see what this organization does with Indigenous Year Fashion Week. 10 years next year.
absolutely.
Yeah. And then one day when they're big and successful enough, I'll be able to say I was there the first day, day one.
From the very
So
beginning.
yeah. So I
Yeah,
think that's what we as Indigenous people have to deal with on a daily basis is how to navigate being Indigenous in a post-colonial society where even now everything is getting erased again. We did all this work to be inclusive, be equitable, and now it's going away. It's like but we as Indigenous people, we have humor. I think humor helps us through any ordeal. Indigenous people laugh. It's like we've always known struggle, we've always known hardship. And so when something in the rest of the world happens, we're like, it's just another day for us. We're still poor, we're still out of sight. And I think there's a joke out there where like we're just eating popcorn while the world um destroys itself. I know, which is not funny, but again, we use humor just to get us out of this funk.
yeah, yeah. Which is super necessary, I think, especially in the darkest times. Necessary
Yeah.
for survival in many different ways. Well, one and we're starting to close now. So you were talking about representation and kind of taking things in your hands to sh- expand maybe the visibility of Indigenous fashion through, well, Indigenous New York Fashion Week specifically, you just mentioned. I think it's also what you are doing with your Indigène magazine. And I'm actually even thinking if this is also an opportunity for, because you were talking earlier about this kind of tension between not being indigenous enough versus being too indigenous, depending on who's judging and like which side you sit on. But I think with this resurgence of Indigenous fashion designers and media and creatives in all senses, there's also an opportunity to maybe redefine what Indigenous fashion is. Or maybe even like making peace in a way with these two opposing pressures and like find ways to maybe sometimes be too indigenous, maybe sometimes be not indigenous enough, maybe sometimes find the right balance, but just, you know, create or continue creating, because I think this is something that has been happening for quite a while, as you said, and probably even since time immemorial, but just create or showcase the true diversity of Indigenous fashion. And I think here there is a fantastic opportunity to do that. And so I wanted to ask, how, like, what are these opportunities that you're seeing with your magazine? Maybe, I don't know, what are your next plans? What would you like to report on other than Indigenous New York Fashion Week for the next 10 years plus?
When I first started, when native fashion first took off and it was emerging, there was only like three, other than myself, three journalists that I could name. There was only a handful of designers that I could name. Now they're everywhere. And I guess I was too much in my Phoenix Fashion Week bubble that I didn't realize, like I said earlier, when I was doing this, everyone else was doing something. And so it's been amazing to see how many new native designers are. And then the ones who've been around, the type of work that they've been doing as established designers. There's so much I can't keep up. I'm not fast enough to write every story, but I think I'm excited to not only write about Indigenous fashion here in the States, I'd like to write more internationally. It'd be exciting to explore other continents, other countries where Indigenous people are doing the work. Because right now I've only done North and South America. So I want to explore other voices around the world, not just some designers, but models, artists, and what else. And right now it's social media and digital based. I do
Mhm.
want to return to the traditional format of a flip book. So I'm
Oh,
excited about
yeah.
that. And just to play. I think Indigenous fashion is there's so much diversity, there's so much content. So it'll be exciting and interesting to see how I can cover it all mindfully, respectfully. I'm excited just to see where this goes. It's a lot of work, but I'm fortunate to be able to do it all by myself because I'm the only person at this moment. So um, I I'm very thankful for Phoenix Fashion Week for providing the platform for me to excel not only in my skills and talents, but because of them, I'm able to do what I do now.
Mm.
And I can do everything on my phone. And people are like, "How did you do that? How did you make that?" I said, "On my phone, on my phone."
Mhm.
And they're amazed of how quickly I can do something. So I hope I can stay that agile and quick because I am getting older. I look younger than I look. And so the body aches and the tiredness kicks in. And so especially at New York Fashion Week, I saw these younger native press and influencers and they were just going. They were like, I was like, I used to be
Right.
you. And then me, I'm like, I was dealing with a pulled muscle, so I was moving really slow. I was trying to enjoy the event, but at the same time, I was in pain. And so it was a reminder that I'm getting older, not as faster. So, with that being said, I probably have to transition again into taking a back seat and hiring more people so that I'm not everywhere doing everything myself. So hopefully, I have a team behind the magazine and we just continue to build and grow.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited to see you grow. Definitely excited to have the paper magazine. I will be trying to source one for myself whenever it comes out. I'm definitely excited about that. And yeah, just continuing to read and see your work flourish and grow more and more. So, one of the things, and to close for real now, one of the things that I like to do towards the end of the podcast episodes is to list three little things, three takeaways, or three actions maybe that we can take or listeners can take from the podcast episode. So I'd like to ask you for those three little things. What I'm thinking is, what would be three maybe strategies to indigenize fashion or to continue supporting Native American and Indigenous fashion from now on?
I think first start returning to slow fashion, whether you're a designer or a consumer. Be mindful of where you purchase things, and if you're not able to purchase something, think of ways you can either thrift, recycle, upcycle. Secondly, center Indigenous voices, collaborate with us, bring us to the table. I think collaborate with us is a big one. Like, oftentimes we're just left out. Like I said, that corner display, cultural display. I'm always reminded that we're just out of sight, out of mind, as think Indigenous people have become. And I think just giving us a platform to really showcase what we can do in fashion, because it's very exciting, and not just collaborate with us during the holiday, not Indigenous People Month, not Thanksgiving, but every day.
Year round.
And most importantly, look at Indigenous people as living entities. We live in this society with the rest of the world. We're contemporary, we're Western, we live in Western cultures. We're not just on the res, living in the bushes. I think oftentimes people are so used to the stereotype, the romanticized version of us that Hollywood has fed them throughout their lives, that when they see or meet an Indigenous person, they're so confused of like, how are you Indigenous? Um,
Yeah.
where's the feathers? Where's the fringe? Where's the turquoise? Where's the buckskin? And then I think because of school, which leaves out Indigenous people in the textbook, they when they see an Indigenous person, they don't know how to react to us. They think we're this monolithic society that we all look the same, we all dress the same, we all speak the same. And I think that's what the main takeaway is, to see Indigenous people as diverse group of people. Because here in America, not everyone knows that there's 574 plus Indigenous tribes. So to ask us, can you name them all? Who wore with? And then that's another thing. As Indigenous people, we don't have a document. Things weren't written down. We're not writers traditionally. We're more oral. We're more storytellers. So nothing was recorded. And so I think non-Indigenous people think just because it wasn't recorded, it wasn't documented, there's no proof. And so,
Yeah.
but there's proof in our stories. Our stories are land-based. Our stories are spiritual. There's a reason why we love the land so much, is because we've been stewards of the land for so long that we know every aspect of the land we're on. And I think just knowing that as Indigenous people, we're just as modern and as diverse as anyone other culture.
Thank you for that. And I think, well, just reflecting back on this last part, I think also I would add maybe recognizing, well, I think this is part of what you said actually, recognizing the diversity of Native American people and Indigenous people. It's not just one single monolith, everyone is the same, but there are so many nations, so many cultures that are sometimes kind of forgotten because they are lumped together into this one single thing, which is very far from the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I would like to invite all of the listeners to follow you, Nia, and to follow the work that you're doing in Indigène Magazine, and hopefully support you in one way or another as you continue to grow, both the new project of the magazine, but also in your career and, yes, well, in life. I would like to ask you, as a final closing question, if there's anything else that we can do to support you, to support your ongoing projects, to just thank you for your generosity and all of the knowledge that you've shared with us today.
Yes, if everyone could follow me on Instagram and to subscribe to uh, my newsletter at indigenmagazine.com. I can't build a magazine without readership. So if you can help
Mm,
me sign up, email, so I can, that when new and exciting things are happening, I can let you all know. And yeah, just help me grow. Just follow me and follow my journey.
yeah, absolutely. And I will link both your Instagram and the magazine to the show notes so that everyone has them available and it's easy for them to follow and subscribe.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Now, thank you again for being here. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot, and as I mentioned before, I have been admiring from afar for quite a long time, so it's been an honor to have you here, and it's a pleasure to chat and to continue to see you grow. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. You know that I love a good conversation about fashion, so please don't hesitate to email me or message me on social media to continue discussing any of the ideas introduced in this episode. If you liked what you heard, please follow the podcast, leave a review, or share it with your favorite fashion friends. It does make a huge difference as we try collectively to build more spaces for thoughtful and nuanced conversations that can truly help us redress fashion.